Hi everyone, my name is Abby Ortiz, and I'm going to be telling you how World War One impacted the art movement. I'm going to start with modern photography. So, modern photography focused on shedding light to the devastating effects on how the war affected society. They often took photos of the ever changing city streets and the people who were affected by the war, paying close attention to the effects the war was beginning to have on society as a whole and the individuals who were beginning to be affected by it as well. Honestly, it was something that was constantly talked about. Like the photos depicting the effects of the war, that is, it was often seen in newspapers and other news outlets at the time. The war really shaped and changed the meaning of art, allowing them to break away from what traditionally normally is and allowing them instead to capture what is going on in the natural photo itself, instead of trying to make it resemble more of a photo. Data, formerly namely as a way to help to stop the war efforts, had many artists and followers who believed strongly against the war and even had a data magazine in where many of their artistic thoughts and views were added to it. They focused mainly on anti-war beliefs. World War One sparked many strong mixed emotions about the war, and the group data often played along people's emotions, causing them to stir about, and instead of being just mere onlookers, they often forced cowards they often forced crowds and followers to take action and be more involved in art World War One. This made this a lot easier to do so. The war allowed for data movement to spread much quicker and become popular all throughout Europe, often shows pieces of art related to the wartime efforts or having pure political cartoons directly aimed at World War One. The next one I can't really pronounce. It's called Distill. So this art movement actually created more as a response to the World War One efforts. They attempted to seek peace and order among a world that otherwise was in total chaos and did not know what was to come of the after effects of the war. So instead of kind of like stirring up emotions, they actually wanted to bring peace and they actually want to bring an end to the war instead of having people anxiety run high, kind of like Dada did. So they sought to move away from complicated art, which wanted to tell a viewer a story and had much deeper meaning behind the painting. Instead, they opted for more of a simplified, broken down version, and they took out the intellectual part of the art making process. They basically kept it simple. So the attempt to keep it simple was a direct response to the war and all the turmoil and chaos it caused. The goal was to be the peacemaker and find a neutral standpoint in the war and the opinions of many people in society. So the next one is constructivism. This created a response to World War One. Originating in Russia, artists sought to create art that can give back to its society. They decided to create constructive art in which was not only beautiful to look at, but was also useful. They began to make extravagant buildings, intending on turning their drawings and ideas into reality for everyday usage. So constructivism was basically like it was art, but it was also art that people can actually live in and actually help give back to society. So this kind of art proved that everyday objects didn't just have to be everyday objects. They actually transformed them into works of art. So this is basically, to me, this was kind of like a direct involvement with communism, how communism was everyone help each other. So this was kind of like the aftermath of World War One, especially since constructivism was more focused in Russia, and Russia was very communist at that time. The next one is supremacists. They believed they were better than all the other art forms taken in the past. Instead of trying to tell a story in their art, they decided to use blank slates like an all black painting and tell the artists until the audience decided what it meant instead of trying to use propaganda and telling other figures or objects like other past movements have done. So this black figure painting is actually really popular today even. The founder of supremacism wanted to move away from realism, depicting instead of objects or things that you can relate to. He instead wanted to move reality and away from the objects of the war to something different, more of an outer body experience. I believe Malevich came up with colors, black, colored, and white, to represent not only his art, but also coinciding with the war and the war of what is happening in Russia, representing the before and after present outcomes. The next one is called Art Deco. With the after effects of World War One, the European nation was feeling the after effects of the war, with having money being especially tight. France was hit particularly hard in this war, and war costs and so many artists saw the extravagant and often expensive materials used as inconvenient, and instead decided to use much more affordable, cheaper materials, starting at the Art Deco movement. Art Deco saw the tough economics on Europe and decided to lend their artistic minds to building more practical function homes while still maintaining a sleek artistic touch to them as well, offering them a double purpose. Art Deco movement became a movement in America which helped create more jobs by creating buildings of the inspiring movement. The next one is Ashcan School. Ashcan, they wanted to focus on the underdog. They really shed light not only on the beautiful new buildings that were being built all around them, a consequence on the afterwar, by the way, but they focused on more on the people who painted them as well as the immigrants. They were very interested in catching the movement of everyday life instead of completing masterpieces. They were more focused on catching the movement. They wanted to tell a story in their art. They painted quickly, trying to catch the movement of their painting. So kind of like if you see a builder, a miner, they'll basically sit there and they'll just paint that miner as he's mining. The next one I have here is called Cubism. The main creator of Cubism was Pablo Picasso. He was very affected by the war. Although he didn't go to the war himself, he watched all of his closest friends went to war, and he watched the effects it had on him, causing him to go into the art Cubism in the first place. Picasso used Cubism as a way to reflect his mixed feelings about the war, clearly abandoning traditional art making techniques, often using very strong reactions. These strong reactions were actually particularly from Germany, who saw the form of art making as undemocratic and actually threatened them. During the war, the Cubism movement took an extremely hard hit and was increasingly seen as anti-art. In response to this, Cubism movement began to blend their artwork into a much more subtle pieces, often blending neoclassicism with Cubism in the works as well. And last but not least, Expressionism. Expressionists after the war saw the city as another battleground, as they struggled to see the effects of the war had on everyday people and the effects on the war has had on them. Expressionists were particularly interested in capturing a person's psychological state when they literally wanted to paint a person's feelings as a direct link to war. They basically wanted to catch that person's expressions and kind of like their form of thought in that painting. They focused on nature as a means to escape to the otherwise grueling, terrible war efforts. They saw nature as a neutral common ground and were often attracted to it as a means of escape for the otherwise creative world. Thank you. That's all I have today.